Hi Krishna. So tonight I have a presentation called Nature of Nature, and my presentation, I don't have it in Danish actually, but I'll speak English and try to translate. And it's fairly straightforward, so it shouldn't be difficult to follow for you who only speak English. So because a lot of what we have been saying, I've been saying here, has been critique of current evolutionary thinking, and also arguing for intelligent design, meaning that nature has features which appear strongly to be result of some intelligent construction, intelligent activity. Is it possible not to have this directly? You cannot turn it off.
It's nice to have a movie.
Det kan man godt. Man skal ikke genere. Ja. But still one might ask, what is the alternative? So in here I'm trying to give some kind of an alternative or idea for an alternative understanding of nature. The materialistic understanding, of course, is that matter is all that is. And so far, actually, we're looking at something that is indicative that matter is not self-sufficient. I mean, not more than just indicative. I think we've seen some pretty strong evidence and arguments for that. I mean, that there is intelligence, there is God behind nature. But still, what is nature actually? So I'll try to explore that a little here. Looking at different evidence, and then from there seeing what is actually needed to explain the nature. Because, I mean, any philosophy of nature, I mean, that's one part also when we say science or natural science, or natural philosophy or philosophy of nature, they're somewhat synonymous. Actually, I don't know if I mentioned that, but the word science is not such it's not a completely traditional word. Did I mention that here at one point? Because the word science, of course, it's a big word nowadays, and everyone wants to be scientific, and it should be good science. Something to talk about what is science. Oh. What is science? But actually, science is actually more or less synonymous with philosophy. So philosophy is a little broader term. Basically, it is they're synonymous, the two words. Hi, Krishna. And like for example, if you read Newton's Principia, it's a book written in the latter part of the 1600s, and it's maybe the most significant book of science in the history of Western science. In that book, Newton really on a large scale developed systematic science, experimentation, mathematical modeling, and so on, And in that book he proposes laws of motion, laws of dynamics and gravity, and showed how he could calculate or explain the orbits of the planets, and so many things could be explained in that way. So, but it's interesting that actually the word science does not occur in that book, although it's a very important book on science. Instead, the word he uses is philosophy, natural philosophy, and experimental philosophy. These are the words that he's using. Which of course gives a good idea what kind of philosophy that he is practicing. Philosophy originally means, it actually means a friend of knowledge, or friend of actually certain knowledge. It conveys the same meaning as the word science. And philosophers are of course aware that there are different ways to achieve knowledge. We are also quite aware that we have knowledge directly from our senses. We have knowledge through logic, rational induction, and also we actually have knowledge coming down. Knowledge is given to us from higher sources. So, and that's also a traditional thing in European philosophy. There are different philosophical schools. Some are rationalists, some are empiricists, some are idealists, and so on. And that's all to a large degree deals with what kind of, what source of knowledge do they accept. So from the word experimental knowledge, you can hear from Newton what he, the kind of knowledge that he has been developing. Really systematic experimentation and observation, and from there deriving some natural principles. So that's a word that Newton he uses for the natural philosophy or experimental philosophy. After Newton, natural philosophy starts becoming developed on a large scale, because Newton showed that actually it's by this approach, you can get an incredible, intricate understanding of nature, very, very practical, and explain a lot. So that started developing on a large scale and assuming a very big identity on its own. It started out from the world of philosophy. At one point it becomes, it takes so much space, and the rest of philosophy this much space. So more and more they came the idea we need a separate word for this. And one Englishman named William Whewell, he suggested in around 1834 the word science. And that caught on, and so that has been used ever since. Yeah. And but that also, of course, gives an idea. Sometimes there's discussions on what is science and what is not science, like that. But it's actually it is philosophy, and you see also William Whewell. He was actually a Christian, and he was not excluding discussions of God from his science. Someone might say, science must deal strictly with material causes and explain everything in terms of matter. And if you introduce anything else, then it's not science. But that's not the original meaning of the word science. And also it's not really logical to do like that. Of course, what is logical science? You know that philosophers of science, they have been debating what does it really mean, the word. And the more you discuss it, the more difficult it becomes to actually establish the word science. Finally come down, some modern philosophers of science, of course we had, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was quite a naive on things, positivistic, prove and demonstrate and like that. Then one Austrian, Karl Popper, he, in the 20th century, he was criticizing this positivistic idea, because it led to the idea that only what we can observe is real, and anything else that we cannot observe is not real. And it has had many it's quite naive understanding of science. And he developed another idea that actually science means a scientific theory is something that you can falsify. It should be formed in a way so you can disprove it in principle. You should be able to test it and disprove it, and that's called falsifying. And he was again promoting that this is really a stringent definition of science, and but also it has its limitations. For example, this theory about falsification, is that science? Can you falsify it? Well, if you can falsify it, that means you can, you see, and it's a dog that bites its own tail somehow or other. So if you can falsify it, that means it's false. But and if you cannot falsify it, then it's not science. And in modern time, or kind of postmodern understanding of science, some have come up with it, that science is simply myth-making. One scientist called Paul Feyerabend, you know him? An American guy. He says it's simply myth-making. Science is just myth-making. And it's really, what really the word means invades often. But anyway, that might be. In one sense, we know it when we meet science. We know what one it is. But sometimes some things are presented which are actually not scientific, and so on. Perfecting the image. What is going on?
This is really...
Kom med noget. Har det ikke for godt? No, it's not the computer. Say it again. So, yeah. Again, back to the question. What is the nature of nature? That was what I wanted to. That. Kunne være. Could be the resolution of the screen. 1 second. Didn't change anything, did it?
Are you trying to prove a point?
This is just technology. It's not science. But I can say, like, what is the nature of nature? And materialists will claim that nature simply means matter, but as we've seen, there seems to be something else behind. And I want to go through here, give some examples of some more scientific evidence, which points to that beyond matter, there are actually other consciousness is also has to be involved. And not only consciousness, but consciousness is not only just one. It has to be even divided in different kinds of categories of consciousness. That should be doing better now. That. Okay. So let's see here. This is of course Charles Darwin, because he's a great representative of this idea of materialism. And if everyone is aware, but actually Darwin was not alone about introducing the theory of evolution. He had his co-scientist, Alfred Russel Wallace. And Wallace, seen to the right, he's actually the one who first came up with the idea. He, at one point he was sick in Borneo with malaria, and during that period he was just thinking about all these what his observations and collections and like that, and what he'd seen, and he kind of came up with the idea about natural evolution, natural selection, and so on, common descent as we discussed. And he formulated these ideas in a letter and sent it to Charles Darwin and asked him, "What do you think of this?" And then Charles Darwin, he got this letter, and he was shocked, because here we had this actually young man proposing the same theory that he had been working on for 20 years to formulate. So he was actually, he was in great anxiety. And but then he consulted with a friend, Charles Lyell, and Lyell suggested, "Why don't you write back to Wallace and say that you publish the theory of evolution on the name of both of you?" And then Darwin wrote back to Wallace, and Wallace, he thought that he liked this. Darwin was a famous man; he was just a young man. It would be, and he and Darwin together. So he agreed to that. And then in 1858, the theory of evolution, a joint paper written by Wallace and Darwin, was published. And that was kind of the birth of the theory of evolution. The year after, Darwin, he published his book, The Origin of Species, and that became very famous. And then from that on, Darwin was mainly the one who was associated with the theory of evolution. But still, Wallace was a very prominent person of that time, very, very prominent scientist in the 1800s, along with Charles Darwin. But what is interesting is that their ways parted at one point, actually around from 1860 and so on. Darwin, he started getting very disturbed with this Alfred Russel Wallace. And here in one letter, as you see here, he writes, "I hope that you are aware that you are murdering our common child." So what was Darwin so dismayed about? He was quite angry. And that was actually that Wallace, he started getting into what is called spiritism. And he was one of a group of scientists who were studying hypnotism and spiritism and somewhat, paranormal, supernatural phenomena on a large scale, very systematically. He would go to spiritual seances with other scientists, and on a completely controlled experiments, they would see, for instance, a medium, like a man. There was one famous Scotsman called Hume, Daniel Douglas Hume, and he could do amazing things. He could just levitate. He would fly up. They would bring him, without any warning. That was the agreement they had. When we just come, you're not prepared for anything, and we bring you to a place where you have never been before, and there you demonstrate your whatever you can. So they would bring him to places like that, and he would, under such circumstances, in front of scientists, he would levitate. He would fly out on open windows, come in, up on the second floor, come in through another window. There would be musical instruments that would play without him touching them. Many things like that. And these scientists have seen documented. We've seen this with our own eyes. he would at one seance Wallace was there, and it was a woman, female media, who was someone else. He was communicating with dead spirits and like that, and during some kind of automatic writing, this woman she wrote some messages from Wallace's, that apparently was from Wallace's brother, who died some years earlier in Brazil. And there was some information that, I mean, she had no chance to know this, but there was some from this brother like that. And so Wallace was getting into all kinds of experiments like that. Not only him, but there were quite many scientists, famous scientists. There was William Crookes, if you know, he was a very English great physician. He was the chairman of the British was in the Royal Society, one of the English most prestigious scientific society. And some other scientists who were studying that were the Curies, you know Marie and Pierre Curie, who discovered radioactivity. They're some of the most famous scientists of all time. Got Nobel Prize in the beginning of the 1900s. Actually, Marie Curie got 2 Nobel Prizes. Pierre Curie got 1, and he was killed in 1906 in a road accident. And but they were discoverers of radioactivity, and everyone knows that who knows about science. But what many do not know is they were also into spiritism and making controlled experiments in the University of Paris, again with medias like that. And we have, still we have their documentation, like what they're seeing, and they say, it's true, we're seeing this with our own eyes. And and so Wallace, amongst other scientists, they gravitated to become more and more non-materialistic. And finally, Wallace, there's a quote we have here from Wallace, where he wrote that the whole world and the world and the whole material universe exist for the purpose of developing spiritual beings. Death is just a transfer of one material existence to the first step in spiritual life. And and he started seeing evolution. He was still an evolutionist who believed species were evolving, but they were evolving material bodies as more or less as a reflection of a spiritual development of spiritual beings behind who were evolving through like that. So some kind of idea like that. And it was based on his scientific experiments. He was actually completely skeptical about these things, but somehow or other he came across a spiritist like that, and he became completely convinced these things are for real. Here he writes, I should mention that for 25 years I've been total skeptic to the existence of any pre-human or superhuman intelligence, and never for a moment considered the possibility that the miracles that the spiritists were talking about could be literally true. If I've changed opinion, it's only due to the proofs therefore. It's not due to any fear of extinction that I've entered into this topic. It's not from an uncontrolled longing from an eternal existence that I come to believe in facts that makes one such very probable if they not directly prove it. So that's from a book from 1896. That book is actually available freely on the net. You can go and read about Wallace's experiments and things, and Google books and places like that. Many are not aware, but they have been conducted, from time and Wallace and onwards, up through the 20th century, many experiments into what we can call the paranormal. One such thing that has been investigated a lot are near-death experiments, near-death experiences, where, for example, a patient, I know you might have patients who talk about that. Have you had patients like that? Who were in comas like that, afterwards will tell we had some experience. They may talk about going through a tunnel or seeing a light, meeting spirits or deceased ancestors, or even being able to, they say they were witnessing something from outside the position, outside the body. They were witnessing their own body. They were witnessing an operation or something like that. Have you had? Yes. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's apparently it's not uncommon. Someone is in a coma, and in a state where actually they are clinically dead. There are no, the heart stops completely. That means the blood stops. That means the brain stops. There are no more brain waves, brain activity. The body is, for all intents and purposes, dead. And then many times doctors are able to actually bring the patient back to life. And in some of these cases, patients tell about stories like that. So one such medical doctor who encountered this repeatedly, he wanted to make actual experiments, mainly to disprove it because he didn't believe it. He said it cannot be correct. So his name was Michael Sabom. There's a picture of him here, and he's I think he's a medical doctor from Emory School in Atlanta, very famous medical university. And at one such experiment, he formed two groups of patients. One was 32 patients who claimed to have had out-of-body experiences, and then another control group of 26 patients who just didn't claim anything. They were just unconscious and woke up, revived. And then he asked them, and he didn't also tell them what what the whole thing was about or like that. He just came and started casually talking to the patients and how they were feeling, and then he started asking, did you have any experiences, when you were in coma like that, and like that. And then some were a little hesitant because, but then he said, I'm curious about, I hear sometimes there are people who have experiences during coma like that, and then someone say, actually, you will not believe what I'm telling you right now. And then he heard some really amazing stories. And so out of these 32 who claimed to have had out-of-body experiences, there were 26 of them actually were able to describe very precisely the resurrection process. They were cardiac patients and heart patients, and they were able to describe in very precise details the revival that had taken place. And 6 of them gave amazing details, not only very correct and description, but details that only happened in a particular revival. For example, one patient told how the doctor was about to give an injection in the right shoulder